Emily and Daniel Mitchell looked like the perfect couple, but behind their picture-perfect life, Emily was hiding a deadly secret, one that would only be uncovered when a hidden camera revealed the shocking truth. You're watching Narrated Mysteries, where real stories of crime and tragedy are told in detail. Subscribe and join us as we uncover the darkest secrets hidden behind ordinary lives. Emily and Daniel Mitchell were the kind of couple people admired from afar. To neighbors, they represented stability, comfort, and success. Their white-painted house stood proudly at the end of a quiet street, with a perfectly trimmed lawn and flowers that bloomed in neat rows along the path. Daniel, a respected architect, was known for his hard work and quiet confidence. Emily, always seen with a warm smile, often chatted with neighbors and offered baked goods on weekends. They seemed to have it all: a beautiful home, financial security, and a marriage that appeared unshakable. But what people saw on the outside was only a fraction of their reality. Inside the walls of their home, small cracks had begun to form. Emily often found herself restless and unsettled, pacing around the house when Daniel was away working late nights. Friends noticed her occasional sighs when his name came up in conversation, but they dismissed it as the ordinary wear of marriage. Daniel, focused on his career, believed he was providing for their future, never realizing that his absence was creating a dangerous void. Their life together looked effortless, yet Emily carried a quiet dissatisfaction she never shared openly. Her charm made her frustrations invisible to others, and Daniel, preoccupied with deadlines and blueprints, missed the subtle signs of distance growing between them. To anyone else, their home was a sanctuary of peace, but in reality, it was becoming a cage for Emily's darkest thoughts. What began as loneliness soon twisted into something far more sinister, a hidden resentment that no one around her could detect. Mitchell's story was about to take a turn so chilling that the neighborhood and Daniel himself would never see them the same way again. Daniel's career demanded long hours, often stretching late into the night. His projects consumed him, leaving him drained by the time he returned home. Emily would wait in silence, meals cooling on the table, her smile fading with each passing evening. At first, she told herself it was only temporary, that his dedication to work would eventually settle, and they could return to the closeness they once shared. But weeks turned into months, and the emptiness of their home began to feel unbearable. Emily grew restless, pacing the quiet rooms while the clock ticked endlessly. The television flickered in the background, but it did little to drown out the nagging thought that she had been left behind in her own marriage. Friends heard her complain lightly about Daniel's absence, but her voice carried a sharpness that hinted at something deeper than loneliness. The warmth she once felt for her husband was slowly curdling into bitterness, and with each late night he spent at the office, her resentment grew heavier. Her mind drifted to darker places as she compared her life to those around her. She envied couples who laughed together at dinner or took weekend trips, while she felt trapped in a cycle of waiting and pretending. Divorce crossed her mind, but the thought of starting over or facing the judgment of her community left her unsettled. To the outside world, she was still the devoted wife, but privately she was searching for an escape that would give her freedom without the shame of walking away. It was in those long, lonely nights that Emily's thoughts began to shift. She no longer saw her marriage as something broken to be fixed, but as an obstacle standing in her way. And in her bitterness, she began to imagine a solution that was as final as it was dangerous. Daniel had always been cautious by nature. His work as an architect required him to think ahead, to anticipate problems before they happened. That habit carried into his personal life, where he valued safety and order above all else. A string of small thefts in the neighborhood pushed him to take an extra step. Without mentioning it to Emily, he installed a set of discreet security cameras around the house. He justified it as a way to protect them both, a precaution he hoped they would never need. The devices were small, nearly invisible. One was hidden in the corner of the kitchen, another tucked above the living room shelf, and a third set near the entryway. Daniel chose places he thought most practical, focusing on areas where someone might break in. He never thought of them as tools to watch over his marriage. To him, they were simply part of being prepared. Another layer of protection for the home he worked so hard to build. Emily paid little attention to his quiet project. She assumed his tinkering was related to work or one of his usual household fixes. She didn't notice the faint red light that blinked in the shadows or the subtle angle of a camera lens pointing into the room. To her, the house felt the same, as it always had. She had no reason to suspect that her every move was now being captured and stored. The irony was sharp. While Emily paced the floors consumed by her private frustrations, Daniel had unknowingly set in motion the very thing that would expose her darkest intentions. The cameras he thought would protect them from strangers would soon reveal a far greater threat, the one living inside his own home. Emily's restlessness began to evolve into something dangerous. Her late-night thoughts no longer circled around loneliness or disappointment. They sharpened into plans. She spent hours on her laptop, carefully searching in private tabs, erasing her history afterward as though that would erase her intentions. Her questions grew darker. What poisons are hardest to detect? What substances mimic natural illness? How much is needed to harm someone without immediate suspicion? Each article she read seemed to feed her determination. At first, the ideas felt abstract, as if she were only imagining scenarios out of frustration. But soon the fantasy hardened into resolve. She convinced herself that this was not only about freedom, but about control. If Daniel were gone, she would have the life she thought she deserved. No more waiting in silence. No more being overshadowed by his endless work. She told herself she was taking back what was owed. Emily began experimenting. In small ways. She tested subtle methods, mixing powders into drinks she discarded, watching how easily they dissolved. She stored containers in the back of the pantry, hidden behind jars no one touched. To her, it became a careful science, a puzzle she was determined to solve. The plan she settled on was deceptively simple. Daniel's nightly tea, a ritual he rarely skipped, became her weapon of choice. A pinch here, a stir there, and she believed his decline would look like exhaustion, maybe an undiagnosed illness. It would be slow, quiet, and invisible to anyone but her. She moved through the house with calm precision, offering him meals with a smile that masked her intent. To the outside world, she looked like a caring wife. But in truth, Emily had crossed a line she could never retreat from. The poison was no longer just in the cup, it was in her heart. Daniel's decline began gradually, almost unnoticeable at first. He brushed off the constant fatigue, telling himself it was the result of late nights and endless deadlines. When waves of nausea followed him into the mornings, he assumed it was something he ate or the stress weighing on him. Emily played her part perfectly, hovering with quiet concern, offering him remedies and encouraging rest. To anyone looking in, she appeared devoted, the picture of a supportive wife caring for her ailing husband. But the truth was far colder. Every moment Daniel grew weaker, Emily's hidden plan was advancing. The cameras she ignored continued there, a silent work, capturing her calm face as she placed a steaming cup of tea before him, or her steady hand stirring something unseen into his meals. On film, her expression revealed what her words did not, an absence of true worry, replaced instead with a chilling detachment. Friends began to notice Daniel's change. His once strong presence seemed diminished, his energy drained away. They encouraged him to see a doctor, to get answers before his health collapsed completely. Each time Emily dismissed the concern with soft reassurances, insisting it was nothing more than exhaustion. Behind closed doors, she grew bolder, convinced no one suspected a thing. The home became divided between appearances and reality. To neighbors, Emily was the worried wife. Inside, she was the orchestrator of Daniel's suffering. The security, the footage untouched and unnoticed, continued to collect every detail, storing the evidence of a crime still unfolding. What Daniel believed was the natural wear of life was in fact the slow result of a betrayal he could not yet imagine. The poison was working, and his body was giving way, while Emily waited patiently for the outcome she thought was certain. Emily's confidence grew with each passing week. Daniel's weakness seemed to validate her efforts, convincing her that her plan was flawless. She moved through the house with an unsettling calm, her steps measured, her actions deliberate. In her mind, she had mastered the art of deception, hiding her intentions beneath the mask of a loving spouse. But pride has a way of exposing what caution tries to hide, and it was in this false sense of control that she made her first mistake. On a quiet evening, when Daniel was too tired to notice much around him, Emily went to the kitchen to prepare his usual tea. She opened the cabinet, her eyes scanning past the rows of spices and herbs until she reached a small container tucked discreetly in the back. She carefully tipped the powder into the cup, stirring with precision, her focus so complete that she didn't even glance around the room. What she failed to remember was that the small camera mounted above the shelf had a perfect view of the kitchen counter. The lens recorded everything: the way she handled the container, the cautious movements of her hands, and the brief moment where she lingered just a little too long over the cup before carrying it into the living room. To the human eye, her performance, they remained convincing, but on the footage, the truth was stark. There was no warmth in her expression, no genuine care in her motions. Instead, the camera revealed a calculated act, one that stripped away the illusion she had so carefully built. This single recording would later become the linchpin of the entire investigation. In her determination to remain unnoticed, Emily had gotten the silent witness watching from the shadows, capturing the evidence that would one day betray her. Daniel's body was wearing down, but his instincts had not. As the days dragged on, he began noticing a troubling pattern. His worst moments of sickness seemed to follow certain meals, almost always those prepared and served directly by Emily. At first, he doubted himself, brushing off the thought as paranoia brought on by exhaustion. Yet the timing was too precise, too repetitive to ignore. Each sip of tea left him weaker, each dinner prepared under her watchful eye left him unsettled. He started testing his suspicions quietly. When Emily wasn't looking, he skipped finishing a cup she made or set aside a portion of food untouched. The result was undeniable. On the nights he avoided her offerings, his symptoms lessened. His strength, though still fragile, began to hold. The connection between her meals and his suffering grew clearer with each cautious test. Emily, believing her plan was advancing as intended, didn't notice the subtle changes in his behavior. She assumed he was simply becoming more tolerant of the sickness she believed no one would question. Daniel, however, was piecing together a puzzle he wished didn't exist. The woman he had trusted for years, the partner he believed stood beside him, was now at the center of his darkest suspicions. Though fear weighed heavily on him, Daniel knew he couldn't act on instinct alone. He needed proof, something undeniable, that could confirm whether his suspicion was real or just a terrible mistake. What he didn't yet realize was that the house itself already held the answer. The cameras he had installed for protection had been recording everything, quietly documenting the betrayal he had only begun to sense. For now, Daniel waited, growing more certain each day that danger was much closer than he wanted to believe. The breaking point came one evening when Daniel collapsed without warning. His body, weakened by weeks of hidden poisoning, could no longer push through the strain. Emily rushed him to the hospital, her face painted with convincing concern, playing the role of a desperate wife terrified for her husband's life. Doctors worked to stabilize him, but their tests offered little clarity. His symptoms pointed in multiple directions, yet none of them explained the steady decline he had been suffering. The mystery deepened, and with it, Daniel's unease grew heavier. As he lay in the sterile hospital room, surrounded by machines and unanswered questions, a close friend came to visit. This friend had noticed Daniel's deterioration long before the collapse, and was not convinced it was simply stress or diet. Quietly, the friend reminded Daniel of the home security system he had installed months earlier. The suggestion was simple but powerful: review the footage. Maybe, hidden in those recordings, there was an explanation that the hospital couldn't provide. Still recovering, Daniel agreed. With help, he gained access to the stored files from the cameras. At first, it was ordinary, the rhythm of daily life, Emily moving around the house, nothing out of place. But as they scrolled deeper, moments surfaced that turned ordinary scenes into something far darker. Emily's hands lingered too long near his drinks, her careful, almost ritualistic stirring. The small container she reached for, again and again, tucked behind the spices. The footage stripped away all doubt. Daniel was no longer left with suspicion or fragmented guesses. He was staring at proof. His illness wasn't a mystery after all. It was deliberate, and it had been carried out by the one person he had trusted above everyone else. The footage spoke louder than any words ever could. Frame by frame, it revealed the reality Daniel had feared but never wanted to accept. There was Emily, moving with precision in the kitchen, her expression calm, her body language focused. She wasn't distracted, she wasn't rushed, she was deliberate. Every stir of the spoon, every measured pour from the container hidden in the cabinet exposed a chilling truth. His wife had been slowly feeding him poison. Daniel replayed the clips, over and over, each time feeling the weight of betrayal press down harder. This wasn't an accident, nor was it a single lapse in judgment. The recordings showed a pattern, repeated actions that could not be explained away. Her secret had been captured in the most undeniable way, stored on the very cameras he had installed, to keep them both safe. The irony was cruel. His act of protection had become his salvation. The most disturbing part wasn't just what Emily did, but how she looked while doing it. Her face carried no signs of hesitation, no flicker of guilt. She appeared almost detached, as if the act of poisoning her husband was just another routine chore. Watching her pour the drink with the same composure she might use to serve dinner was more haunting than the act itself. For Daniel, the truth was devastating. The woman who had vowed to share his life was the same one orchestrating his death in silence. There was no misunderstanding, no chance of denial. The evidence was irrefutable. What once was love had transformed into a carefully disguised threat, and the mask she wore in public had finally slipped. Her evil secret was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was caught on camera, and now there was no turning back. With the horrifying footage in his possession, Daniel made the most difficult decision of his life. Weak but resolute, he turned to the authorities. He knew that confronting Emily directly could end in disaster. Instead, he handed the recordings to investigators, each clip detailing the cold and calculated actions of a woman who had once promised to love him. The police wasted no time. What they saw left no room for doubt. This was a deliberate attempt to take a life. A warrant was quickly obtained, and Emily's world began to unravel. Officers searched the Mitchell home, combing through every drawer, cabinet, and hidden space. In the pantry they found the small containers Daniel had seen, her use on camera. The powders were sent for testing, and the results confirmed the worst: toxic substances, dangerous enough to kill if ingested in repeated doses. Her laptop revealed even more damning evidence. Deleted search histories were recovered, filled with questions about undetectable poisons, lethal dosages, and ways to disguise symptoms as natural illness. Each digital trace pieced together the mindset of a woman who had not acted impulsively but had carefully crafted her plan over time. When Emily was confronted with the findings, her silence spoke volumes. She offered no explanation, no plea of innocence. The composed image she had built for years collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. What she believed was her perfect crime had been undone by a simple precaution Daniel had once installed without a second thought. The community that once admired her was stunned. The smiling wife they had trusted with their children's cookies and neighborhood gatherings was revealed as something entirely different. Emily was no longer a doting homemaker. She was a suspect facing the reality of justice closing in. The trial of Emily Mitchell drew intense public attention, transforming the quiet suburban neighborhood into the center of a storm. Courtrooms filled with reporters, neighbors, and strangers eager to hear how a seemingly perfect wife had turned into a would-be killer. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the evidence, painting a picture of cold calculation. Jurors were shown the footage in haunting detail. Melloway opening the cabinet, handling the container, stirring Daniel's drink with deliberate precision. Each frame was a silent witness that spoke louder than any testimony. The video was supported by forensic results. Experts explained how the toxic substances found in the Mitchell kitchen matched the symptoms Daniel had experienced. Doctors testified that the repeated dosages could have ended his life within weeks if not discovered in time. Digital analysts walked the jury through Emily's laptop searches, exposing her late-night inquiries into poisons, disguises, and fatal dosages. Together, the evidence formed a chilling timeline of intent. The defense struggled to counter the overwhelming proof. Attempts to frame Emily's actions as harmless or misinterpreted fell apart under the weight of the recordings. Her silence throughout the proceedings did little to help her cause. She sat emotionless as the truth was presented, her once friendly reputation shattered beyond repair. Neighbors who once admired her took the stand, expressing disbelief that the woman who smiled at block parties could orchestrate such cruelty. Their shock echoed through the jury box, reinforcing the sense of betrayal that defined the case. In the end, the verdict came swiftly. The jury found Emily guilty on all counts, concluding that her plan had been deliberate and merciless. What began as whispers of suspicion ended in a courtroom filled with certainty. Emily Mitchell was no victim of circumstance, but the architect of her own downfall. The sentencing of Emily Mitchell marked the end of a story that had gripped everyone who followed it. Life in prison was the judge's ruling, a punishment meant to reflect the gravity of her betrayal. The woman once admired for her warmth and charm was now stripped of her image, defined forever by the crime she tried so hard to conceal. The courtroom that had watched her sit in silence now saw her led away in handcuffs, her mask finally gone. For Daniel, survival was only the beginning. Physically, he grew stronger with time, but the emotional scars cut far deeper. Every corner of his home carried a memory mills at the kitchen table, nights when he sipped the tea that nearly killed him, and the silent footage that revealed the truth. The house that once symbolized safety and love had become a reminder of betrayal. Eventually, he left it behind. Unwilling to live within walls that carried such shadows, the community also struggled to reconcile the truth. Neighbors who had once waved at Emily from across the street spoke of shock and disbelief. How could someone who appeared so ordinary, so kind, plan something so sinister? Their disbelief only deepened the haunting lesson. Evil often hides in plain sight, disguised by a smile and polite conversation. Daniel slowly rebuilt his life, focusing on healing and regaining a sense of trust. But the story of Emily's deception remained with him, a permanent mark on his past. Her downfall was a chilling reminder that danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the person closest to you, hidden beneath layers of familiarity. And in this case, it was only a silent camera that ensured the truth was ever seen at all.